ally. Ally. I had to think of a title for a book. You don't think about, you write a book, 400 pages in a year, in the time I came back. Then I had to get a title for it. And strange enough, we were visiting my sister-in-law on the Upper West Side, and I turned to Sally, my wife, and I said, I know it's got to be one word with 2 syllables. What is it? And then I paused for a second, and I thought, ally. And I wrote it out on a piece of paper. And Sally looked at it and said, oh, Americans are going to look at that and think it says alley. All right? Then Sally said, people are going to look at that and say that you forgot the S. Got that. But ally it was, and think about it. Ally has to be one of the most beautiful words in the English language. Really, ally. Ally almost uninvariably has a positive connotation. One can be a partner in crime, but not an ally in crime. It's a beautiful thing to be an ally. In Hebrew, too, the term for ally is bnei brit, literally son of a covenant. Son of a covenant. And when you use the term bnei brit, it connotes the special relationship that exists between the Jewish people and God. Israel and the United States are allies. They are bnei brit. And Israel and the United States enjoy a very special relationship indeed. They are united by deep spiritual ties. They united by ties that go back before 67, before 48. They go back to the 1620s when the first Puritans landed in this country and they thought that they were the new Jews and this was the new promised land. And they had a strong connection to the old Jews, us, the old promised land, the land of Israel, and they thought that it was their duty as good Americans, good Christians, to help us restore our ancient homeland there. That is the basis of the spiritual ties, and America today remains one of the most religiously observant, modernized countries in the world. More Americans go to church every week. I can't tell you how many times I would walk into an office in Congress, some member of Congress from western Texas, with an area that was a district that was 5 times the size of the state of Israel, not a single Jew in it, and he'd have a Bible open on his desk, open to the chapter of Genesis that says, those who bless my people will be blessed. He'd point to that Bible, he'd say, I believe in that. How much aid do you want for Iron Dome? Just like that. How much aid do you want? So the spiritual ties. But on top of that, Israel comes into being in 1948, not just as a Jewish state, it comes as a democratic state. We're the only functioning democracy in the entire Middle East. We're one of the few countries in the world that's never known a second of non-democratic governance. We're like the United States and Canada and Australia. That's a very, very tight bond between us. And then after the 1967 war, when Israel defeated several Soviet-backed armies, American policymakers woke up and said, whoa, there's this superpower in the Middle East. We should be allied with that superpower. And thus began the U.S.-Israel Strategic Alliance, which today is stronger than ever. It includes weapons development, joint maneuvers, special forces training, weapons, anti-ballistic systems, intelligence sharing. I could spend at least an hour and a half just on that part of the relationship. Think about it. How many countries in the world have a spiritual tie, a democratic tie, and a strategic alliance with the United States? Think about it. You'll be very hard-pressed. So it's a special, special relationship. And it finds expression in all different ways. The United States provides more military aid to Israel than any other country in the world, close to $4 billion per year. The United States stands with Israel in international forums such as the UN. It cooperates with Israel in vital research and development projects which are crucial to both of our economies. You know, all of your computers, most of your cell phones run on components that are made in Israel. Made in Israel by U.S. companies, by the way. The Apple never had an R&D center outside the state of California. Now it has 3 in the state of Israel. Amazing. About 300 American high-tech companies have their R&D centers in Israel. Aid to Israel, on the other hand, most of it, 75%, is spent in the United States. And tens of thousands of Americans work in jobs created by American aid to Israel. Israel furnishes the United States with an unparalleled source, not just of intelligence, but also of cybersecurity, with an army, the IDF, that is more than twice as large as the British and French armies combined. Can you imagine that? And we just happen to be strategically located at the nexus point of 3 continents. So you're not going to find an ally like Israel for the United States, an ally that is not only technologically and militarily robust, but it is unreservedly, unabashedly pro-American. We don't have anti-American demonstrations in Israel. We don't have people burning American flags in Israel. How many places in the Middle East, much less the world, can you say? This is the alliance between the two. So in many ways, the United States and Israel are ultimate allies. And yet, at times, those two allies are separated by deep divides. We are divided about the peace process, about the issue of settlements, about the status of Jerusalem. We are divided about U.S. arms sales to Arab countries. And we are divided most profoundly, most poignantly right now about the pending agreement with a nuclear-empowered Iran. Now, at times, the depth of those divides can threaten to drive the two sides, Israel and the United States, irreparably apart. My book is about one of those times. It's about the 4.5 years I served as Israel's ambassador to Washington. Now, up to that point, my entire life had been about straddling those divides. I grew up where? New Jersey. West Orange, New Jersey, in the same house, as Rabbi Levine said, the same house where my parents lived today, West Orange, New Jersey. As a kid, I was clumsy, I was dyslexic, I was hounded by anti-Semitic bullies in our neighborhood, basically your typical American childhood I had. But I was different. I had a rather unique set of dreams. One of my dreams was to be a writer, which was pretty funny because as a dyslexic kid, I couldn't spell, but I wanted to be a writer. The other dream I had was to be an Israeli, which was funnier still because I got expelled from Hebrew school. I actually read my bar mitzvah in transliteration. Do you believe that? How embarrassing is that? I did. I got kicked out of Hebrew school. And yet, for some reason, I had this deep and abiding passion for Jewish history, for the Jewish people. I was keenly aware of being brought up in the post-Holocaust generation. My father here landed in Normandy and fought all the way across Europe in World War II. And every time I'd come home all beat up from being set upon by anti-Semitic bullies, he would take me down to the basement and he'd show me an album that he had from World War II of liberated concentration camps and piles of Jewish bodies. And he'd say, you see that? You see that? That's why we need a strong Israel. Had a profound impact on me as a kid. Now, I loved America. I loved its ideals. I loved its culture. I'm a sentimental guy. I'm the first one to do this. My kids make fun of me all the time. I cry at the end of the Star-Spangled Banner. I bring them down to the Lincoln Memorial. I read the, Lincoln's second inaugural address. I start crying. Impossible. And yet, I longed to live in Israel someday, and I knew that someday I would realize that dream. I dreamt of someday being an Israeli soldier, which was, again, kind of funny, because I couldn't really run, much less run with a rifle. So that was going to be difficult. And I dreamed, as teenagers often do, I dreamed of meeting the girl of my dreams, all the while getting turned down repeatedly for dates to the junior prom. And then, when I was 15 and visiting Washington with my Jewish youth group, I chanced to greet Israel's ambassador to the United States. And I actually get to shake his hand. And he was the great hero of the Six-Day War. He was serving as Israel's ambassador then. His name was Yitzhak Rabin. And I thought to myself, okay, here's another dream. That is what I want to be when I grow up someday. I want to be Israel's ambassador to the United States. So in a classic American way, I set out to fulfill my dreams. And I did. I taught myself how to spell. And I became a writer, a professor, an historian. I forced myself to play sports. I worked on a kibbutz. I moved to Israel. I became a paratrooper. I worked in the government of Yitzhak Rabin till the day he was assassinated. And some of my dreams became nightmares, to tell you the truth. I participated in several wars. We saw our eldest son, Yoav, wounded in battle. Sally and Amy's sister, Joni, a Jewish day school teacher from Connecticut, came to Israel on a scholarship to Hebrew University and was killed by a suicide bomber in 1995. And then filing past Yitzhak Rabin's casket outside the Knesset. So with dreams, sometimes some of those dreams were very difficult dreams indeed. But then there was joy. I met Sally, who was actually too cool to go to the junior prom because she was busy playing Frisbee with Jerry Garcia in San Francisco and serving as a muse for the Jefferson Starship. Read all about it. And then in 2009, finally, after nearly 40 years of dreaming, I fulfilled my teenage vow. I could now be the bridge between the two countries that I so loved and I so believed in. Israel's newly elected Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recognized that I could be that bridge, and he named me Israel's ambassador to the United States. But strengthening or even sustaining that alliance proved to be more challenging than anything I'd remotely dreamed in. America in 2009, I know this is ancient history, America in 2009 was deep in the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. It was exhausted after two traumatized Middle Eastern wars. The entire Middle East would soon come apart, as we've known it, with not one but two violent revolutions in Egypt. Syria and Iraq would essentially cease to exist as states. The peace process was dead in the water. Having just turned his back on a full offer of statehood in all of Gaza, half of Jerusalem, most of the West Bank, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas refused to even talk to us. He simply walked away from the peace offer and then refused to come back to the negotiating table. Iran, meanwhile, was building its nuclear infrastructure. It would soon install thousands of centrifuges and have enough for not one but 4 nuclear bombs, enough enriched uranium for 4 nuclear bombs. And in the middle of this maelstrom were two men, Israel's Netanyahu and America's newly elected president, Barack Obama. Rarely at such fateful junctures in history were two leaders more mismatched. Here was Netanyahu, a former Special Forces officer, a combat veteran, economist, a former ambassador, ex-prime minister, foreign minister, finance minister, with 20 years legislative experience, all that, but largely reviled throughout the world and didn't command overwhelming respect even within his own country. And by contrast, Barack Obama, who didn't have Netanyahu's experience in all these different fields, but he was revered in most of America and throughout most of the world, in fact. So exact opposites of one another. On one hand, there was the right-of-center Netanyahu, the enemy of political correctness. He hates political correctness. He's sort of the anti-rock star. And the first thing that Netanyahu did when he walked into his office in the first part of 2009 was he hung a picture of Winston Churchill over on his office so that Winston Churchill would always look over his left shoulder. No kidding. On the other hand, Barack Obama, progressive, the epitome of political correctness, very cool, who upon entering the Oval Office removed a bust of Winston Churchill. Can't make this stuff up. But in addition to the personality differences, Obama and Netanyahu were fundamentally divided on policy. President Obama had a worldview. It is the president's prerogative to have a worldview, which espoused unprecedented American support for the creation of a Palestinian state, a worldview that reached out to what the president called the Muslim world and sought reconciliation with Iran. He was upfront about this from the get-go, from day one. And from the outset, Obama abandoned two core principles that had existed since the mid-'80s in the U.S.-Israel alliance. The two core principles were no daylight and no surprises. No daylight meant that we could have differences. We were going to have differences over Jerusalem. We were going to have differences over settlement. But the idea was to have differences behind closed doors and not in front of the closed doors, so that our enemies wouldn't internalize that there were differences between us between which they could insinuate themselves and cause both of us damage. That was no daylight. No surprises meant that if an American president, President Clinton, President Bush, was going to make a major policy statement on the Middle East that would impact Israel's fundamental interests, Israel would have an opportunity to view that speech before it was given and have a chance to submit our comments and perhaps alter it a bit. Now, those two principles were, as a matter of policy, jettisoned by the new administration. That's just its characteristic. And I saw it happen. I was present at the first meeting between Netanyahu and Obama. It was in May of 2009. It was one of the first of 12 such meetings I attended in the Oval Office. And Obama surprised Netanyahu at that first meeting by demanding that he freeze all construction in the West Bank as well as in East Jerusalem over what is sometimes called the pre-67 borders, but is really the post-49 borders. And he also demanded that Netanyahu come out publicly in favor of the two-state solution. Now, these were both very difficult demands, particularly for Netanyahu because he was the head of the Likud party. He had never endorsed the two-state solution. Certainly no Israeli prime minister had ever frozen construction in the West Bank, and no Israeli prime minister by law, can freeze in Jerusalem because Jerusalem is different than the West Bank. Jerusalem was formally annexed by the Israeli government in the summer of 1967. The Prime Minister of Israel has no more authority to freeze construction in Jerusalem than the President of the United States has an authority to freeze construction in Pittsburgh. So these were very difficult demands, but what made them more difficult was the abandonment of the principle of no daylight. These demands were made publicly, and very publicly. And then no surprises. A month later, in June 2009, the President went to Cairo, purposely skipping over Israel, if you remember. And there he expressed, again, unprecedented support for the Palestinian cause, and he recognized the Iranians' right to peaceful nuclear energy. Now, these were all departures from longstanding American policy, but they were all made without informing Israel. We never got a chance to look at the speech before he gave the speech. I was sitting in Israel's Pentagon when I heard that speech, the Kiryat. I was sitting with a group of generals, Israeli generals, and they were very, very shocked by this speech. It caught us all off guard. So clearly, we had entered into a new chapter in the U.S.-Israel alliance, a different era, and Israel was going to have to grapple with that new reality. There was no choice. This was reality. And that challenge would have been monumental for any leader, certainly of Israel. I think that the worldview of the Obama administration would have been a problem for an Israeli government that was left of center, but it was even more problematic for an government that was right of center, and that was the truth of it. And Israel's government made its share of mistakes. We all made our share of mistakes. We surprised Vice President Biden when he came to Israel, and Vice President Gavin, I want to tell you unequivocally, is a great friend of Israel. We actually surprised him twice when he met with Netanyahu. The second time when he met with Netanyahu in the city of New Orleans, we announced construction projects in East Jerusalem. Now, Netanyahu didn't know about these announcements in advance, but, it happened under our watch. We were responsible. We surprised him. And Netanyahu actually apologized for those missteps, and we pledged to prevent them in the future, and we pretty much prevented them in the future. But Israel also announced other settlement projects, usually in the aftermath of some terrorist attacks, in order to palliate outraged Israeli public opinion, but that had an immediate impact on our relationship with the Obama administration. We did not do enough to dispel the impression I stress, you have to read about in the book, that somehow Israel was supporting the Republican candidate in the 2012 presidential election. We didn't do enough. Still, the abandonment of the principle of no surprises was not for Israel a matter of policy. It was just a mistake. And Israel, we were repeatedly surprised. We were surprised by snubs at the White House. I was surprised, in May of 2011. On May 18, 2011, we all knew that the next day the president was going to give a major speech on American policy toward the Arab Spring. Remember it? There was a lot of hope back then. And I was in the White House, and I inquired whether part of the president's speech would deal with the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and they assured me that it wouldn't. And the next day, May 19th, the president gave a speech. Most of the speech was about the Palestinian-Israel issue, and it stated that the American policy would now be to seek peace on the basis of the 1967 borders with swaps. That line had previously been the Palestinian policy, and the president in one fell swoop made it the American policy, but he did it without telling us. It would have been hard enough even if he had. So the next day, if you remember, the prime minister comes into the White House, and he supposedly lectured the president about the speech. Now again, I was there. I helped draft Netanyahu's remarks to the president. And I can say, again, without reservation, that he never lectured the president. All of his remarks were addressed to the Palestinians, saying the Palestinians have to realize that there is a Jewish state, it's a legitimate Jewish state. He never lectured the president. But a decision was made to put daylight between the United States and Israel, and that daylight, the way it was spun, was quite searing. Now, my role for all this was to try to somehow hold things together, to describe to Netanyahu the view from Washington, the things you see there that you don't see from Jerusalem. And my advice personally was to try to accommodate Obama as much as possible, try to roll with whatever punches there were punches, but to dig in our heels on the main issue, and the main issue was Iran. And sometimes Netanyahu heeded that advice. He declared his support for a two-state solution at Bar-Ilan University, and it was a tough move for him as the head of the Likud. He initiated the first ever construction freeze in the West Bank, not in Jerusalem. It was the moratorium. It lasted for 10 months. Again, a heavy lift, as we say in diplomacy. But unfortunately, the prime minister received scant credit for these concessions, and the worldview set out in the Cairo speech continued to guide the president's policy. I participated in the early stages of Secretary of State John Kerry's peace initiative. This is now 2013. And I can tell you that Netanyahu was reportedly ready to make very far-reaching concessions. I was in the room. He was willing to go very, very far. But Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, again walked away from the table, and the administration put the bulk of the blame on Israel. They said that Israel had decided to build 700 units in a settlement. And the process, according to John Kerry, went poof. All right? I spent the next 12 hours on Israeli television trying to find the Hebrew equivalent to the word poof. It doesn't exist. There's no poof in the Bible. It's only Yiddish. Pfeifen. Pfeifen. Poof. But where did we build the 700 units? We didn't build them. We denounced them. We built them in Gilo, which is a Jewish neighborhood of Jerusalem, which nobody thinks in Israel. Nobody thinks of as a settlements. We had a fundamental disagreement, and it was placed in the searing daylight for everybody to see. Now, did this mean that Barack Obama is anti-Israel? And I want to say this in the firmest possible way. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It is true that the Israel he admired was not the Israel of the settlers, and it's not the Israel of the Likud. He says that. And the Israel he tends to admire is an Israel that he believed existed before 1967. I think it's largely a mythic image. I think Israel today is much more democratic and much more liberal than it was before 1967. And he also has stated on more than one occasion that he and his administration understand Israel's interests better than Israelis do. That's a quote, by the way. You're shaking your head, but it's a quote. He, at the same time, presided over the closest security cooperation we've ever had. You can ask any Israeli general or head of the Mossad this, they'll tell you the same thing. Extended vital aid to the Iron Dome system, which proved so effective. Last year it saved thousands of lives, not only Israeli lives, it saved Palestinian lives. If we didn't have Iron Dome, the Israeli army would have to gone into Gaza. We'd have no choice. Thousands of Palestinians would have died. And I saw how, when Israel really needed him, the president was there. December 2010. Hanukkah. I'm going to the Hanukkah party at the White House. Every year is a Hanukkah party. Very strange, because you have a lot of people wearing various types of Jewish headwear, and the Christmas decorations are already up at the so you have this rather surreal image of a lot of Hasids around mistletoe and Christmas trees at the same time. It's always very surreal. And but walking into the White House, I get a call from Prime Minister Netanyahu with a voice that I've never heard, and he says that a fire has broken out along the Carmel mountain range, and we can't stop it. And 24 Israelis have already been killed, and we are out of retardant. That's that orange-colored stuff that they throw out of planes. We have no fire extinguishing planes, and the fire is descending on Haifa. We have nothing to stop it. He says, go to the president right away and get help. And I said, okay, we got a little fortuitous situation. I'm about to go into the White House. I'll go and see him. So I go into the White House. I run into Susan Scher, who was the First Lady's chief of staff, who was the daughter of a guy who plays tennis with my father. You can't make this stuff up. And I said, I need to see the president right away. And I saw the president, and I tell him, Mr. President, Israel needs you. There's a fire that's descending on Haifa. We need retardant. We need planes. President Obama turns to Reggie Love, who was sort of his right-hand man, basketball player. He says to Reggie, give Ambassador Oren everything he needs. He makes that a list. That night, I spent the entire night in the White House in the emergency situation room. We got the retardant. They went and scrubbed warehouses from the U.S. Army in Europe to get us the retardant. America has 11 extinguisher planes. We got 8 of them. Special U.S. Commandos called hotspots who parachute into forest fires. We got those too. They left Boise, Idaho for Newark that night, and they arrived in Israel, helped us put out the fire. So I saw that when Israel needed us, the administration was there. The administration could be a very good ally. But when it always came back to the absence of the 2 principles of no surprises and no daylight. And those 2 principles were sorely, sorely lacking when it came to the most paramount issue of all, and that is the nuclear program in Iran. The nuclear program in Iran. And understand this, that the Iranian nuclear program is not 1, but 3 existential threats to Israel. It's extraordinary. Now, what's the obvious existential threat? They're going to develop a bomb. And if you look in the New York Times today, there's an op-ed by an expert, Alan Coopermerd, an expert on nuclear nonproliferation. And he says that the current deal on the table is laughable. Laughable for him. It's a nightmare for us. Because it's not going to give Iran a 1-year breakout capacity. That is 1 year between the time it decides to make a bomb and actually has a bomb. It's probably closer to a month. So they already have ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that have one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to carry a nuclear warhead. And they have rockets that can hit every city in the state of Israel. That is the first existential threat. The second one is that Iran happens to be the largest state sponsor of terror in the world. And if Iran gets military nuclear capabilities, guess what? So are the terrorists who support Iran. They're going to get it. They try to kill us in Washington, to blow up our embassy. So personally, we know about these terrorists. And the third existential threat, once Iran gets the bomb, I guarantee you Saudi Arabia is going to get the bomb. Turkey's going to get bombed. Egypt's going to get the bomb. All these different Middle Eastern states are going to get the bomb. The Middle East is going to become a profoundly unstable nuclear neighborhood. You think it was trouble with chemical weapons in the hands of Bashar al-Assad? What do you see? Everyone's got nuclear weapons. And it's not going to be in the Middle East as well. As far as we're concerned, once Iran gets the bomb, nuclear nonproliferation becomes an oxymoron. Now, there were structural differences between us and the United States on the issue of Iranian nuclearization. I'm going to tell you something that's going to seem painfully obvious. America is a big country. It is far away from the Middle East. You, Americans, are not threatened with national annihilation by the Iranians, and the United States military has the largest capabilities of any army in the world. Israel is a tiny country. We are situated in Iran's backyard. We are threatened with genocide by the Iranian regime. Every week they say they're going to wipe us off the map. And while the IDF, yes, is this robust and motivated military, we do not have strategic bombers. We do not have aircraft carriers. So our margin for error with Iran is exactly 0. We cannot afford to make the single mistake, the tiniest mistake with Iran. America, you got a little leeway. But in addition to the structural differences, there are ideological differences. Ideological differences, and they were in the Cairo speech. And they came down, from my perspective, to these very intimate discussions that we had over the course of 4.5 years with the United States on the Iranian nuclearization. And it came down to the single question, is the Iranian regime, is it or is it not rational? Goes to the heart. And the president in some of his recent interviews has said the Iranian regime is rational. They're anti-Semitic, but they're rational. And they operate at a cost-benefit analysis, and that if they go from being part of the problem to being part of the solution, they can become a productive regional power, and they can even help resolve the Sunni-Shiite split. That is the president's position. Our position was we are dealing with a medieval-type jihadist cult that believes it takes orders from a hidden imam that is trying to kill people around the world, including Americans. They've killed more Americans than any other terrorist group outside of al-Qaeda. And that when they say they want to destroy and obliterate 8 million Israelis, we've got to take them seriously. They're not rational. And sometimes irrational regimes can take rational steps. The Nazis did it during World War II. They conquered Poland and France, perfectly rational, to accomplish an insane goal. So we had to take it seriously. It really went to the core. And we got the sense over the course of the 4.5 years in Washington that the Obama administration actually feared in his possibility of an Israeli preemptive strike against Iran more than it actually feared the Iranian nuclear program. And Netanyahu nevertheless responded in the fall of 2012 with his red line speech that gave the president time and space to work out an agreement. Remember the bomb he drew, right, in the General Assembly? I was there when he drew the bomb. He's a very good drawer. In the book, he says to me, they're going to compare me to Yosemite Sam. And I said, no, Mr. Prime Minister, they're going to compare you to Wile E. Coyote. And guess what? I was right. Unfortunately, that gesture brought him little credit too, and tensions came to a head in November 2013. This was right after I finished my job, and the revelation that the U.S. had been secretly negotiating for the previous 7 months with Iran without telling us, without informing Israel, no surprises. And the U.S. had laid the groundwork in which Iran could retain all of its nuclear facilities and its infrastructure, its centrifuges. Most of them would not be operative, but it would still be able to break out and create a bomb within a year. Now, according to this op-ed, at a much less time. And then these tensions turned really ugly in ad hominem attacks against Netanyahu by unnamed administration officials using words that I really shouldn't use in Shul, but which, again, I had a hard time translating into Hebrew. They relate to certain bodily functions of barnyard fowl. Follow that? You got that. And the Prime Minister responded by giving a speech to the joint meeting of Congress. This is last March. I was running for office at the time. I opposed the speech, I want you to know. I opposed where he gave it, but not the substance of the speech. The substance of the speech I agreed with more than 100%. The alternative to a bad deal with Iran was not, as the administration claimed and claims to this day, the alternative is not war. The alternative is a better deal. It is a deal that ties the lifting of sanctions to the dismantling of Iran's nuclear facilities and the ending of its support for terror and the cessation of its threats to destroy the Jewish state. It ties the lifting of sanctions to Iranian behavior. Is that so much to ask for? Now, this bad deal is being set to be signed in the coming days on June 30th, which is why I decided to publish this book now. I think you got a great representative from Random House in the audience, London King, who knows that they wanted to bring this book out during the book selling season, which is in the fall, so we could really sell it for Hanukkah, right? Who brings out a book in late June with this heavy message? This is already summer reading. This is the period where you bring out books like Jaws, all right? I thought about changing the title and calling it Jews. I brought it out because what's at stake now is too dangerous to go without serious discussion. Discussion among us, within the Jewish community, within the world Jewish community, but first within the American public at large. My book is a call for reason. It is, I sincerely believe, an effort to set the record straight and to point the way to a restored and reinforced friendship between Israel and the United States. These bonds, I emphatically believe, are vital not only for both our countries' security, but for preserving whatever semblance of stability remains in the Middle East, and the alliance is vital for the well-being of the world. All of the world looks at the U.S.-Israel alliance. The jihadists to the Japanese, they all look at how we rate with one another, and they gauge America's commitment to its allies based on our relationship with Israel and the United States. My book is a passionate appeal to Jews both here and in the Jewish state to uphold our sense of peoplehood. It's a call for gratitude. It's a gratitude for all of us being alive at this totally unique moment in Jewish history when we have these two great, successful, vibrant, vital Jewish communities. And we're strong. And every single Jew in the world today is free. Something that didn't exist when I was a kid. There are millions of Jews who weren't free. We should all be grateful. The book is a plea for restraint, from one who has given his life and dedicated his life to spanning and closing the divides between the land of his father and the land of his forefathers, from the land of my birth to the land of my birthright. It is my reminder that Israel has no alternative to America, nor does America have many friends in the world like Israel. My book is a chronicle, it's a revelation, a testament, and a confession. It is a monument to that most beautiful of Hebrew concepts, Ben Brit, son of a covenant, and to that most precious English word, ally. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank God. Thank you. Thank you very much.
The question is, why should Israel have the ability to have no surprises, no daylight, when no other ally of the United States has the same?
All right. Thank you for the question. I'll just take fundamental issue with it. The brief I got entering the embassy in 2009 that these were the core principles, that they had been observed with at times surprises and with at times daylight, but observed. It had been the basis of the relationship since the mid-'80s. The last time we surprised the United States, with any great surprise was on the Iraqi attack in 1981. There was a Reagan peace initiative in the early 80s that surprised us. Pretty much after that, we're pretty well coordinated. And I would disagree. I think that there's no surprises and no daylight with a lot of American allies. I think it's an important part of any alliance. It was an important part of alliance with America's relationship with Great Britain in World War II. And I think that many of America's allies, and I know from dealing with other diplomats in Washington during my period, also felt that these core principles had been abandoned with them, and we shared some of the same observations and some of the same frustrations. So I'm just going to take issue with it. And I was also, not only as a diplomat, but as an historian. I knew that, for example, when President Bush came out with various speeches relating to the peace process, Israel had advance warning and had a chance to review the text. When President Clinton came out with major speeches against the Middle East, Israel had an opportunity to look at the text in advance and submit its comments. Look at the roadmap in 2002. There was an entire discussion between Arik Sharon and George Bush before that was ever published. So that was the basis. And it doesn't exist today, but one of at the end of the book includes about 4 pages of prescription, where I say this is how we have to move forward, this is how we have to restore the alliance. One of the central themes of that plea is to restore the principles of no surprises and no daylight. I want to add one more thought to that. I get to do this because I'm the speaker. When the president announced to a group of his first meeting with Jewish leaders, this is also in 2009, that he was going to abandon, he actually told them, this is a quote, this is not an estimate, he was going to change the policy and put daylight between Israel and the United States, because he said during the Bush years there was no daylight and Israel sat on the sideline and it eroded America's credibility with the Arabs. That was his position. But at the risk of sounding irreverent, it was wrong, empirically wrong. It was because there was no daylight that Arik Sharon felt empowered to remove Israeli settlements from Gaza in 2005, and because there was no daylight that Ehud Olmert was able to offer a Palestinian state to Mahmoud Abbas. It is in the absence of the principle, okay? It is in the absence of the principle that we have not had more progress toward peace. Israelis, when we feel embraced by the United States, when we feel secure, Richard Nixon understood this. When we feel secure, that is when we make concessions. When we're knocked on the head, that is when we buckle down. And my repeated plea to the administration always was, try love. Wow. Now, sorry. The best of my knowledge, no. That the president felt he had been surprised by these demands, and they were made quite publicly. And when I entered office, I had to deal with the fact that the prime minister was not yet ready to declare. He had to lay the groundwork for that with his own party. It was not easy. It took time. And we weren't given much time. And tremendous pressure was put on us. By contrast, as far as we could ascertain, there was no pressure put on the Palestinians and on the Arabs. Certainly no public pressure. I couldn't discern any private pressure either. So there was a demand made on one side, and it was made very openly. Now, we can contest the fairness of it, but as an ambassador, that's not my job. My job is just to say, okay, this is what's happening, and this is what we have to do. The book dwells on my own ambivalence toward what became known as the moratorium. I had ambivalence about it. I on one hand, have had difficulty with our settlement policy. I was not a member of the Likud and not a major proponent of settlements. I still am not today. And yet I felt that by paying a price to the Palestinians to negotiate with us, we would be creating a difficult precedent. And, in fact, we did. I ended up supporting the moratorium, but with a heavy heart, because I felt, yes, it was the lesser of two evils. Either we accustomed to the Palestinians to getting something in return for talking, or we get a conflict with the president. And I thought that the lesser of evils was to spoil the Palestinians.
It's a statement about how the New York Times believes that Iran's nuclear program has been going on for a great period of time, over 22 years.
Okay. My first encounter with the specter of the Iranian nuclear program began with Yitzhak Rabin. He gave us an internal briefing. This is now in the mid-90s, where he said that he was pursuing a peace with the Palestinian in order to stabilize our relationship with the Sunni world. He didn't think we'd get peace with the Sunni world, but to stabilize the relationship so that we could meet the great millennial threat, which would be the Iranian nuclear program. This is in 1994-95. Okay? So Yitzhak Rabin was thinking about it. Netanyahu, in his first term of office in the late 90s, was dealing with it. And yes, the Iranians have encountered some difficulties. Sometimes they've had help with encountering difficulties without going into too much detail. And they haven't been able to reach it. But in all of our meetings with our American counterparts on the intelligence level and on the diplomatic level and on the military level, we looked at the same data. We reached almost the same conclusions. There was no argument about where Iran was in terms of its enrichment, whether it was 3.5%, 20%. A lot of this is very technical, by the way. The number of centrifuges, what type of centrifuges, whether they were IR-1s or IR-4s. But then, in 2009, surprise, Iran had built a secret underground facility called Fordo, which was under a mountain. Why would you build a peaceful nuclear facility under a fortified mountain? I can't imagine that. And not tell the UN International Atomic Energy Agency. Why would you do that? Gee, because you want to generate electricity? Okay. So, all right, obviously Iran is trying to create, we knew that they were experimenting with the military aspects of this bomb. We knew it. We knew where they were doing it. And so I don't know what the New York Times is telling us, because if the New York Times is criticizing us, then it's criticizing American intelligence as well. We do not have a difference of intelligence. We have a difference of interpretation of the nature of the regime, and we have a structural difference. That's what we have. So New York Times, alas, has printed an inaccuracy. That's true. We should get somebody from the back. Wow.
Is there anything that we in this room can do to possibly thwart the plan to deal with Iran?
Yeah, it's four simple words, I think. Do not be silent. Do not be silent. This is the moment where we have. I can't emphasize this. I don't think of myself as an apocalyptic person. I really don't. I couldn't do what I do in life. I couldn't raise our kids and our grandkids where we live and be like that. I'm also a believing person. And I talk about that in the book as well. A relationship with God. I think the Jewish people have a relationship with God. But I also know an awful lot about the Iranian nuclear program. And I also know a lot about Iran and what it's doing. And this is a moment when not just this expert in the New York Times today, but prominent Americans, former Secretary of Defense Gates, former Secretary of Defense Panetta, when former head of the U.S. military intelligence tell you that this is a bad and dangerous deal. It's a bad, dangerous deal. When Henry Kissinger and George Shultz tell you that this is a bad and dangerous deal, listen to it. Don't just listen to me. And I understand a lot of it's technical. But at least understand that a better deal is possible if we keep ratcheting up the pressure there. That's what brought them to the table to begin with. Have a credible military threat and tie in any nuclear arrangement to Iranian behavior. It has to be linked to behavior. Or else, what are you doing? You're making a deal with a terrorist state that is trying to destroy our people. We not have the right, we have the duty to make our voices, the duty. Oh boy.
Yes, the question is, the United States is hell-bent on signing this accord. What are the options after that?
I think we have to focus on getting a good deal and not start hypothetically, what do we do if we have a bad deal? I'll only say this. Israel is a sovereign country. Israel is a sovereign Jewish country with a tragic past. We have the right, we have the duty, we have the capability to defend ourselves.
What makes you think, since Russia and China are deeply involved, that if the United States backs out of this deal, that Russia and China would follow the United States in subsequent negotiations?
I think that it is a challenge. It is indeed a challenge. But if there's not strong American leadership, I guarantee you they won't cooperate with the sanctions. And America, $17 trillion economy, people will be reluctant to risk American deals, doing business with America, to do business with Iran. They just will be. It won't be perfect. But right now the Iranians sense that the sanctions are lifting already. They may not sign, even if America wants to sign. They may feel, and I think with a certain amount of logic, that the longer they wait, the more concessions they get, because that has been the pattern. So I think the important thing is leadership and a strong stand saying, all right, we need a better deal. Not a bad deal, because I think the Iranians are going to just keep dragging it out. Love the questions about Iran.
She's asking for 5 points to push for a stronger deal.
Okay, I mentioned behavior. I mentioned dismantling. Okay, dismantling of actual infrastructure. That includes Fordow, that includes Natanz and various structures. Dismantling of centrifuges. They have 19,000 of them. Right now they're talking about keeping 6,000 of them running, but the others are just going to remain unplugged. Okay, I'm not done yet. An end to research and development of advanced centrifuges. Because right now most of the centrifuges are called IR1s, but they're developing IR4s that will have 4 times the enrichment rate, which means that the breakout with an IR1 is, say, 1 year, just for argument's sake, but with IR4, it's 3 months, because they're enriching so much faster. Inspection of all military sites, and Iran comes clean with all of its military trials and tests for nuclear weapons. 5, right there.
The polls show that there is a declining support for Israel among particularly younger Americans. What can we do about that?
Yeah, the support for Israel in this country is a lot the way some physicists say about the universe, that it's expanding and contracting at the same time. It's expanding because support for Israel among the American public is close to an all-time high. It's over 70%. Whereas in certain demographic areas, particularly among young people, certain graduates of elite universities, it's going down. It's contracting. And we cannot afford to rest on the first laurels and ignore the latter. We have to reach out. We have to reach out to young people, to young Jews. We have to live up to our promise to be the nation state of all the Jewish people. We're not just the nation state of the people who practice their Judaism in a certain way. We're the nation state of everybody who believes they're part of the Jewish people. But we have to not just say it, we have to actually practice it. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle. I come from a synagogue not so different from this one. I come from your traditions. And I am fighting now in a different capacity so that we can live up to our reputation. From the American Jewish side, it is encouraging organizations, I got to plug this, like Birthright. Both Sally and I were involved in Birthright, and getting kids, American Jewish kids, to Israel, to experience Israel. It's very often a transformative experience. It's investing in Jewish education. People who are more rooted in their Jewish identity are going to be more pro-Israel. They just are. All the studies show it. We have immense work before us if we're going to preserve what I regard as, the most precious asset we have, which is Jewish peoplehood. The state of Israel is predicated on Jewish peoplehood. Without Jewish peoplehood, there's no Jewish nation state. That's simple. Talk about existential issues. Yes, indeed. I want to have someone ask me about being in Knesset. Come on, it's a fun thing. I want a Knesset question. Irrespective who wins in 2016. Listen, at the end of the day, it's not going to be about personalities only. It's going to be about interests. I never forget that all the controversy surrounding Chuck Hagel. Remember Chuck Hagel when he was named to be Secretary of Defense? He didn't have a great voting record on Israel. And of course, Israel does not get involved in the confirmation processes in the Senate. But I was less concerned. I knew whoever crossed the Potomac and sat down in the Pentagon would not exactly get up in the morning and sing Tikva, but would understand very, very quickly that there's no substitute for Israel as an American ally in the Middle East. Just understand that. And it happened with Chuck Hagel. Chuck Hagel became very, very supportive. I accompanied him to Israel. We had a great visit. I think that's the perspective once you sit in the White House. And my specific request is for restoring some of these core principles. I think it's very important. We are going to go on disagreeing about a lot of things. You've got to understand this. Even if there's a Republican in the White House, we may go on disagreeing about settlements. We may go on disagreeing about Jerusalem. I hope we would have fewer disagreements about Iran. They're just different perspectives. Even the closest allies are, at the end of the day, independent countries that have different interests. They do, and different politics internally. Of the candidates running now, I know some of the Republicans. I know Hillary Clinton quite well. We worked extensively. There's some very formidable candidates running. You are actually blessed in the candidate department.
Thank you so much for coming.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.